So you mentioned you're with the women's national football team for the last couple of years. What else you got going on?
Yeah, last 2 years, and last few months, I decided to move away to try to focus on finishing few books and start up the new uh, website and projects and things like that. So I started the Agile Periodization School, trying to make that a little bit as a brand and finish. I have few books that I need to finish. Or I'll let me paraphrase that. Few books wants me to finish them. So, it's anyone who's writing or creating something like that have this feeling that something needs to be written through them or something like that. So I have this urge to do it, and I'm clearing up the table for from other side projects and everything, just to focus on that mainly for the next 6 months or something like that. And
What are the topics of those books?
so I want to finish the Strength Training Manual, Volume 3. So
Mm-hmm.
it has been 5 years since I published that book, and I already have the material and everything. I just need to sit and write, and that's gonna be more theory for people who want more in-depth material, and I want
Yeah.
to write something that's more very straight to the point, more practical. And I just published the Badger Protocol, which is kind
Mm,
of rewritten blog posts that I already had on the complementary training, but I compiled them in a book and updated tables, added some extra stuff, and published them as a PDF, and just a few days ago as a paperback. So
gotcha.
it's quite very practical. So I want to make something like that for multiple stuff. So one should be strength training, and the other I'm slowly preparing is endurance training for combat sports or conditioning for combat
Nice.
sports. But I just had a talk with a friend of mine. Is that we all have this idea that we need to read like shitload of books before we write our own. It's like you want to make sure that you cover all the bases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fuck, I haven't read this book, I haven't read this research. But at the end of the day, you just need to write it, and you can always write a second edition, if that makes sense. So
Mm,
once you finish those, so rather than waiting for Godot to come, right? And just, start writing.
nice.
So that's something I'm trying to finish. And we are here in Belgrade, in Serbia. Few friends of mine are open a gym, actually a combat gym, and we have multiple classes: MMA, boxing, wrestling, BJJ, and no gi or some, and a lot of others. And we also have a floor equipped with gym equipment. So I'm trying to set it up um, for multiple purposes. One is mainly training, doing the physical preparation of the athletes, of the professionals, but also, as with any commercial facility, we have, say, kids classes, and then we also have parents who are doing nothing pretty much during the kids classes. So we want to offer them also a place to
Mm,
train, like and I'm in the middle of reorganizing, getting equipment, and trying to brand it around something. So it's not that easy if you think about it. So how to call it? Like, should it be like a functional fitness, or the grinder zone, or grinding zone, or something like that? So, and also, um, the current project I'm trying to do is like, let's take these commercial stuff and recreational athletes as an example. So I built some type of a query, like a form, Google form. So if someone wants to join the guided, let's call it like a semi-private group training,
yeah.
you are pretty much limited by the equipment. You need to organize things based on the equipment available, but you also have athletes or parents in this case who are with different abilities and different objectives, training under the same rule in the same time with the same limited equipment. So what I'm trying to do now is to come up with some type of a prescription that takes all of that into account. So and I can quickly be more agile on the spot, figuring out, and someone new comes in, and need to figure out this guy or girl is not particularly suited to do some type of say a back squat, whatever, but they still need to train with the group. So I need to quickly come up with a alternative
Mhm.
and also collect the data alongside. So it's a complex problem, but I'm enjoying solving it because it can also scale up because it's going to solve the problem of other people, and it can help kind of community and also create potentially a product
Mhm.
which can be sold. So uh, I'm trying to do so at the moment. I'm building a app, actually Excel workbook, which can come up as app eventually. So to take all of these into account. So what do you do when someone new comes in when you don't have the maximum? So you cannot use percent based stuff. So how can I quickly adapt to that scenario under again constraints? Because we might have, on a given block in training, we might have a squat rack as a station, potential like hanging equipment, dumbbells, and you need to come up with a particular solution for an individual. And also, uh, here, I'll give you one analogy. So 2010, it's not an actual analogy, it's an example, real life example. So I was 2010, I was with Mike Boyle in Massachusetts as an intern. And when you sign up for a summer training, particularly recreational athletes also, you get a form. You need to fill up the form. And in that form, you enter stuff like your goals, what you want to achieve, like lose body fat, feel good, improve performance, rehab my injuries, and so forth. And then everybody does the same workout, right? So, I mean, you can achieve most of these goals by doing same generic workout, right? So, what I'm trying also to do with this is to kind of organize and segregate people with different goals, or at least something they think they're different goals.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just need to start working out. They're gonna figure out, what they want to do and things like that. But eventually, let's say someone wants to do rehab their shoulder injuries, and someone might want to do like a lose body fat, and someone might want to do like gain extra muscle, and they are training at the same time in the same under same roof with the same equipment. And I have few potential solutions. One is to have a training a little bit modular, so you can quickly kind of fork during the workout in the same spot. So I'm trying to figure out how to do it, both real life with our clients, and also come up with a solution that can be later on scaled or sold as some type of a kind of franchise, or pretty much make money out of it. Hopefully, make
Yep.
some money out of it.
It's always nice in coaching because there ain't much incident areas of the profession, but it's actually a good segue into. I believe you must have coined agile periodization yourself since you're also doing a school on it. So it'd be good to go into the topic of it and maybe explain for everyone listening what is agile periodization and why does it even exist when there's a billion other periodization schemes out there. If you're anything like me, you're short on time. Kids, family, work, training, and having to cook meals on top of that is just not going to happen. So I'm happy to announce Trifecta Nutrition are sponsoring the podcast. You get epic meals like these ones: turkey taco bowl, Texas barbecue protein plate. These are a couple of my favorites. But it means you don't have to prepare all your own meals, and it makes getting and good nutrition relatively easy. I've tried other meal delivery companies. Most of them are too high fat, not enough carbohydrates, or if you're getting kits where you have to cook it yourself, the portions for two is actually for one, especially if you are like me and you're training often. So if you want to take something off your plate and have meals like this delivered to your door, go down the description. There's a link there where you can order Trifecta meals. This is the performance line, which are higher protein and higher carbohydrate. And you can use code LIFTBIG40. You'll get 40% off your first order.
So pretty much came up around 2014 when I was in Qatar, and because I code, I write stuff in R, make tools for coaches, and I tend to read literature about software development, like coding books, project management books, and so forth. So I stumble up, but very much Amazon recommendation on a Scrum book, and it's about the project management, agile project management in software industry. And I was reading it and I'm like, hell, man, this is so applied to our domain. It's not like I'm the first to pinpoint to the complexities of predicting how the people will respond and so forth. John Kiley was there critiquing traditional periodization. We have different frameworks in different industries. For example, Kinevin framework, identifying simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic domains. That's all pretty much known, and everybody's talking about it. And this Scrum book gave me a little bit more operational stuff that I can actually try implementing. So it's pretty much my implementation of the agile software development into working with in a sport performance, and also solves out some of the conundrums that I've been wrestling with over the years. Like you read stuff in the textbooks in the college, and then you come up working with the athletes, and then you're like, this doesn't really work in real life. So I have so many, I call it bottom up problems, like as I stated previously, like athletes with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different objectives, but need to train with the same equipment. You might have, say, in the combat sports, you create like a long-term plan for the athlete, and they got bad contact in a sparring. They have say a wrist problem, so cannot do any lifting with the wrist, or twisted ankle during a scrimmage in a no-gi. So you need to immediately come up with something that's kind of adjusting as you go. So pretty much planning as you go. And last few months, I've been trying to even more make it more operationalized, make a clearer framework. And I got few ideas from actually working with a team sports. So I'll give you one example, like which is quite obvious. And initially, I saw it as a problem, but now I see it as a solution. Is that, for example, in traditional sports, like let's call it traditional kilogram, centimeter, seconds. So where you're actually competing, like in the Olympics, track and field, including the combat sports, the competition season is quite short, and then you have a large preparatory periods, and most of the knowledge, pretty much, on physical preparation and planning comes from that type of sports. And when I started working in football and team sports, we had competition every week and sometimes multiple times per week. And I saw it as a potential problem. So now I call them as a multiple, I don't know how to call these sports, like long season sports or something like that. And the question is like, how can we apply that logic to sports such as, combat sports? And I think we can. So similarly is that the difference between, say, preseason and in-season in team sports is not that different. So in season, we have few, you have a match, travel, recovery, you have day or two to load, then you taper for a next match and so forth. And that tends to repeat. So the question is like, is the preseason that different than an in-season, particularly for team sports? And the answer is no. Maybe a week, but then in a week 2 or week 3, you're already starting to having some type of friendly matches. And I think that can be also applied to the short season sports, like combat sports, when you have like a major competition every few months, is to kind of simulate. You don't need to have a competition, but you can, as if you are having a competition. So you have these shorter blocks and you use them as tiny experiments. You have some threads of stuff that needs to be inside the program, but then you keep experimenting. So every week you might have like a harder sparring session where you're actually simulating the conditions on a match. So that might involve no stoppages, no instructions, like in a normal skill practice. You have specific duration of the bout, like the 5 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 5 minutes with 1 minute break. You put people around, you create like a atmosphere. They need to warm up for it. You record it, and then you have, they don't need to kill each other on that session. It's not a real fight, but you act as it is, and you also use it as a test. So that has multiple benefits. It keeps athletes on the toes because they need to demonstrate what they learned, so they don't drift into good enough, and that good enough can drift across the time. Because if you have like a 4 months to prepare for a match, you might like a drift into good enough, but this keeps you on your toes. It also gives you information immediately where you need to be working on or maybe lacking, and you can use it as a test, as a kind of, we can also do a review of particular scenarios that happen there and so forth. Again, it's not like you're going to jump bandwagons based on a performance on that, but it's going to give you extra information about what worked, what not. And then so long story short is that the idea behind agile periodization is having these iterative blocks of time where you have certain ceremonies inside. So you have, say, one iteration in agile development. In software industry, they call it sprint. It's like usually 7 to 14 days. And in that sprint, you have certain time box stuff and certain ceremonies. So you need to plan, you need to demonstrate what you have built, and then you do need to review. So, and do a retrospective. So with the review is like you demonstrate the software, and with the retrospective, you are trying to update or improve the processes behind it. So that's a little bit, it's more formal, it's ceremonial, let's call it like that, and it's transparent. So the idea is that, okay, we start with something, I call it a minimum viable program, MVP, and through a few iterations, you come up with something that's pretty stable. So the idea behind agile periodization is that plan as you go. It's not like you have a big chunk of plan and then development and that's it. So this is more iterative. You figure out as you go because you never know what's gonna work, condition changes and so forth. So, the athlete might get some type of a small injury. We had usually the combat sport athletes have issues with the staph infections and other type of infections, and sometimes you never know how things gonna work around. So that's pretty much the long story compressed.
How does that look with strength and conditioning then in terms of the planning and programming? So is it just kind of like, this is what we're doing this week based on what I think you need, and then kind of just iterating week on week from that, where you're kind of just logically progressing if needed, or if something comes up, changing things based on what feedback you get from the athlete or injuries or anything like that?
I would say you always start with some type of a priori theory that you believe is going to work. So that can come up with evidence-based practice or practice-based evidence. There's some type of a historical data that it seems to be working. You want to make sure that you cover all the bases, and then you keep that thread of that. And then that's pretty much your, I call it left side of the barbell, protecting from the downside. And then you can experiment. So it's just like, when you have this type of a baseline, you are free to experiment, because if the experiment fails, you still have baseline stuff. So the idea also behind the agile periodization with these frequent and formalized testing sessions is that you can always rely on that. And when you have a testing session, you're always going to be working on all the elements of the fight. You're not going to invest, say, 3 weeks in doing a aerobic zone, right? What I mean, like base. So it's going to keep you on the toes. But to answer your question, is that you can start experimenting. So I'll give you one example. When we worked with Alexander Rakic, so we wanted to try to do a microdosing, and microdosing is just doing a very short strength session, can be explosive session or what have you, conditioning, after the MMA skill session, rather than a separate session itself. And originally, that's a good idea. I would say something to try, but we figure out it takes too long. So it takes like 2.5 hours to finish a session. And also Alexander said, you know what, I prefer to do it as a separate session. So I was like, fine with me. You just need to figure out. So I don't think there's like a hard, this is the way to do it. And probably in the combat sports, speaking of that, testing session. It's your partners to do that session are not always available at the time you want them. So sometimes it's like my sparring session cannot do Saturday. This week he can do it on Wednesday, and then you need to figure out, okay, how can we adjust to that? So I think I would say you need to have these few key workouts planned, and everything should be kind of more flexible around them. And when it comes to strength training, I would say you just want to tick it off the box. It's like you want to make sure that you hit 2 total body sessions, something like that. And sometimes that can be a full session in itself, and sometimes can be like a quick microdosing session after a MMA skill session or something like that. So let's say a skill session was quite easy. The athlete doesn't feel like being worked on, and you might say, okay, let's do a one upper body movement, one lower body movement, or some isometric squeezes and something like that. So I think you just need to be attending to what's happening in the training. And I also think the athletes themselves needs to be responsible a little bit, just to be also attending. And it's a catchphrase like listening to their own bodies, but eventually create a framework, and over few iterations you're going to come up with something doable.
Yeah, I think for most of us that have worked in team sports, we kind of understand, like, week to week things change. Athletes coming from games injured, we have to make changes on the fly. I think where people might hear this and maybe struggle a little, that they may be prescribed or maybe doing their own program. They're like, okay, this week I have squat 3 sets of 5 at 70%. Next week it's 3 sets of 4 at 75%. They have this percentage-based stuff. It's all sorted out, set reps maybe for the next 4 weeks. How can someone maybe take what they're doing there and have this more agile approach to training if they already maybe have, or maybe they're so used to this kind of structure?
I would say that's an outstanding question. And I've been kind of struggling with to sort that out. I think this type of progression gives you long-term load progression, just a trend, and then you're going to fluctuate around it. So it's just making sure that in the long run you should be increasing your loads, if that makes sense. But doesn't necessarily imply to do it every session, like have a pressure to increase every session. So you're familiar with the starting strength progressions, and just increasing every session.
Yeah,
I think that works particularly if you are a beginner or you are only doing that. But eventually, after like a few weeks, it can become like, oh fuck, I need to. This week I squatted 150. Next week I need to 152, and then you are focusing on the wrong things, if that makes sense. Particularly if you're combat athletes, I think that the focus is a skill session. Is the MMA? It's a skill session, and then everything around it should be a little bit more flexible. So I think you also have some type of combat sport athletes who gain confidence from doing extra stuff, like feeling strong in a squat, in a bench. That gives them a little bit of confidence, feeling being prepared. So I think that's also quite important to address. So from a case to case. But eventually the point is not to become a power lifter or bodybuilder, right? But also on the flip side is also you want to make sure that you have some type of a trend. So how I deal with that, I tend to prefer like a 3 to 4 week planning blocks, let's call it like that, with strength training. So let's say I use I call it a training or prescription maximum for say bench press. So let's say 100 kilograms, and you use that to prescribe training across 3 to 4 weeks. So whatever. So it can be like 3 sets of 5 at 75, then next week is 77, and then 80. And then if everything goes well, then next 3 weeks you can bump up that prescription maximum. So it doesn't necessarily need to be 1 RM. It can be, usually it's a little bit submax. So next week you might increase it to 102. So you're gonna get this zigzag or waving pattern, right? So but eventually the idea is to, over the long run, you are increasing your loads. So we can use this type of percent-based prescription to give you some type of a ballpark estimate. But at the end of the day, is the I think it's a subjective feeling that needs to be listened to, or you can use it as a quality control. So you might prescribe, say, sets of 5 or sets of 4 to 6, let's call it like that, at certain zone, and don't go over two reps in reserve, if that makes sense. So it's a combination of bias or structure across time and flexibility or variance using a subjective feeling. So you're going to give a wiggle room, and that wiggle room is slowly climbing up across time, but the athlete will be able to adjust on the spot. So again, depends who you're working with. There you can use different types of prescription, right? And to be honest, I'm slowly moving back to paper. So I tried different apps, and I just had a talk with Alexander Rakic about app. Like, we just prefer paper. I just want to print him a paper PDF, and he can write weights and things like that, rather than looking in a phone. I mean, there are pros and cons with both approaches. Phone is good for if you're working with recreational or selling your workout, like separate of your service, so they can download your workout and they can check the exercises and so forth. So I think the apps are good for that, and also collecting the data. But to be honest, I think we are overdoing this data collection stuff. So it doesn't need to be that damn complex. So
Yep,
I went off the script, right? A little bit.
No, that's good.
In the
That's
answer.
good. I'm going to plug your strength card builder, because I've been using your strength card builder since you made it, I think in 2015.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I've been a big user with that, with all the teams I've worked with, because it's so handy to be able to plan blocks out of it, drop down menus, add all your different things in there, so it's just all there to be able to refer back to. That's an awesome template, that one.
I'm trying to improve that one, because that one is kind of, because it's used VBA to save the workouts.
Yeah,
it's kind of stuck to one.
Yeah, mine would crash because I would fill it full, and then it would just keep crashing, and then I have to make a new one.
I'm trying to simplify it so you can actually create your own kind of style of planning. So, and also to address the stuff that I mentioned previously. So sometimes with some athletes, you want to have like a ballpark estimate percentages, but with some, you don't know their maximums, or you don't have training maximums. So you need to start with something that's kind of good enough to have some type of prescription, making sure that loads goes up over weeks. And then at the end of the day, it's just coaching on the spot and teaching them how to adjust it. Because, I mean, sometimes even us coaches need someone to tell us to. Sometimes it's hard to adjust yourself, right? So even if so how many times you went to the gym, you restarting and you feel like, I can fucking lift this, but you shouldn't, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And then, something pops up or breaks. It's like,
that's every coach's life, I think.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we are just dumb, right? Coaching ourselves. We just need some type of a structure and some type of a simple rules, heuristics, to be able to be kind of use them on the spot.
How does then conditioning fit into this kind of agile periodization approach? We can go with fighters as well. It's always a good topic to go down with the podcast, but any other examples too of athletes and stuff like that, kind of with how it fits within a plan, and then how it's kind of adjusted in the weeks, and what dictates what gets adjusted and why.
So I would say, similar to previous, I don't have a concrete solution. I have problems that bother me. And I think we need to start with this idea. Can we reach high level of conditioning needed for a sport mainly by doing that sport, right? Like, how much do you need to actually supplement? And I think we can reach, particularly for a conditioning, I think we can reach very, very high levels of conditioning without doing anything extra. And I know that combat sports are quite notorious for doing some type of like a road work, a lot of road work and things like that. But when you start thinking about, I should put combat sport and methodology behind it as our top priority, I think this becomes second nature and can be easily solved. Like you can achieve a lot just by doing your sport, at least from a conditioning perspective. And the question is like how much extra stuff you want to do and need to do. So I'll give you one example. I'll also use Alexander Rakic. Like with the previous group, they focus, I would say, too much on this type of conditioning. Like he did a lot of bike work, on a grinder work. Objective was to increase the VO2 max and things like that. But now we just focus so much on a skill perspective, just making sure that he does all the skill work with the high quality, with pretty much everything was ecological, doing like a aliveness training with a live opponent. Unfortunately, he had such a bad performance in a latest UFC bout, but the training camp and everything was nearly perfect. But speaking of him, is that we try to do everything through combat sports for conditioning. Like we did some explosive work and lifting weights and so forth, but pretty much everything was dealing with a live opponent. But eventually, if you keep doing that, you come up with, you mentally become a little bit overburdened. So we tend to give him, I use a term from Mike Tusher. I use it like a pivot session or pivot day. You can call it recovery session, but it's not mainly recovery. It's mostly pivoting from your main activity for the sake of being sane, right? Just moving away from a gym, moving away from the mats. And he likes cycling. So, we say, what we can do is like, we can go for like a cycle 1 hour or something like that. Like that's zone 2. It will help with the cardio. It will make him want to come to the gym again. So I think we need to see like a bigger picture from that perspective. Not only like, am I increasing lactate threshold of VO2 max or something like that? Like separate from the complete picture of a session and a whole preparation. But long story short, I was wrestling with that and actually started writing the manual. And I have it in a very, very rough draft. So I was exploring a little bit all this stuff. I have Joel Jamieson book here, right? So I keep referencing it, and I think it becomes very complex at the end of the day. So, I think you need to do some type of extensive work. Can be like swimming, running, riding a bicycle, or jump rope or something like that. Just making sure that you do like 30, 40, 60 minutes of easy work, and then do some type of hard conditioning. So, and again, that hard conditioning, I would say, can also be on that non-specific equipment, like, intervals 15-15 or 15-30 intervals on a bike or a running or something like that, or hill sprints. But at the end of the day, I think you can do all of these also on a heavy bag. We call them a punch-out intervals. And you can also do some type of isometric squeezes for wrestling or MMA or BJJ. So I think that will be more specific. And it's a tricky question to answer. Like, okay, do two hit sessions per week or something like that. But also something to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, we train athletes. So I think I'll say first you're training the human, then the athlete, and then the fighter. So I think even with the high level, we still need to address some type of a basic basic athleticism, if that makes sense. Just to it doesn't necessarily need to improve performance in the sport, but it can act as a supportive stuff. So let's say the cycling for Alex is he gonna be a better MMA fighter from cycling? Probably not, but he can go. It's like a meditation for him. Go for a longer run or a bike ride, and then think through, relax, and then come up for the next few days of training fresh, like more receptive to to actually do that session. So not sure I answered your question. Probably.
No, it's good because it goes through your thought process behind it. It's good for me. It's good for the listeners as well. That's what I like about the podcast, because you can kind of just talk through things and then people can kind of understand kind of where you're coming from too, versus, I don't know, just like a short
I would say
answer.
like um, in a school community that I started recently. I'm finishing with some type of course on philosophy behind agile periodization, and I think one of the main, I call it mental models, or a problem that all the coaches keep wrestling with is problem of substance versus form. So substance is like underlying traits or qualities, and form is how you combine them. So if you think about it, you have coaches who might say, you need to do like intervals to improve your VO2 max. And some coaches might say, you ditch that, you will just do everything through sparring. So it's one is more focused on the substance, one is more focused on the form. At the end of the day, we need to be wise to combine them. So let's say if your training session is very intermittent, which is the case for combat sports, then sometimes you need to overload these underlying traits or qualities, whatever there be. So focus more on a substance rather than doing intervals. You might go for like a 3 times 3 minutes, something like, call it a VO2 max interval. So it's not specific to a sport, but it's needed to overload the underlying qualities that might be needed for a sport, if that makes sense. So we need to stimulate, not only simulate a sport. And
Yeah.
you've been answering this problem or this conundrum with resistance training in combat sports. You don't necessarily need to always mimic the sport, because you are actually not developing anything. You are not creating enough of overload to target those underlying substances, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I've spoken about this recently on a few different things where I just kind of split it up. Like you have, well, at least in conditioning and even strength training, you've got, you're either targeting the physiology or you're targeting technical, tactical skill development
Exactly. Yes.
and movement efficiency. And then these two things kind of come together. You're doing something probably non-specific to overload to get the physiological change or the adaptation in the gym. And you're doing the stuff on the mats or whatever it is you're doing that's going to overload the movement efficiency. And then this underlying stuff kind of just transfers over and gives you a little bit more to do on the other side. I guess as you mentioned, and strength training has kind of been made obvious, but in conditioning, it's probably been made less obvious, I guess. Maybe because physiology is a little harder to grasp for most of social media.
I just had a talk yesterday with, we have the brave, I think he's bantamweight champion, Borislav. He's very good fighter, and he also thinks. And we spoke yesterday like how we can modify certain constraints in a drill to overload some stuff. So the problem is, like, if you want to say overload isometric squeezing, like being able to squeeze someone with a specific constraints, or if you want to develop ability to punch hard, to condition your wrists and everything, because you do need to, you cannot use a live human because you're going to hurt him, right? So you need to use a dummy or a heavy bag to do so. So we cannot make everything ecological or eco. You need to isolate it, so move outside. So that's from a conditioning perspective, at least from that, like punch out drills and these like specific squeezes, let's call it like that, for MMA. Sometimes you can do it with the opponent, but also when you talk about this tactical stuff, I think the objectives are slightly different. With the tactical or form, you want to be as economic and as efficient as possible. So you don't want to squeeze unless you really need to. So you want to kind of save yourself from burning matches, because you never know what's going to happen down the road in a match. So you don't want to waste all your, I would say you want to solve the problem with the minimum amount of effort. So you want to train efficiency, smoothness, right? With the skill sessions. And with the substance sessions, you actually want the opposite. So you want to actually burn the matches. You actually want to overload the stuff. You want to be fatigued. So sometimes combining them might risk teaching a bad kind of tendencies or
Mm.
patterns. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you roll, if you roll with someone, you want to be smooth. Try to finish someone with the least amount of stuff, and then if you want to overload some underlying substance, underlying traits or qualities, you want to isolate and say, okay, we're gonna go for like a say 20-second maximum hold on the dummy or a heavy bag, and then you really want to waste that energy to overload. So
Mhm.
kind of I see these as a two barbells, like two sides of the barbell. You do need you need both. You cannot just mimic everything with the sport. You sometimes need to isolate to overload, if that makes sense.
Mhm. No, exactly. That's perfect. Then to further go down that road, I want to touch on that Badger protocol too, because that's become pretty popular around. Do you want to just explain what the Badger protocol is and why? I don't think I've read too much on your Badger protocol. I haven't used it myself, so it's interesting to go into why it came about and what you're actually trying to achieve with this particular protocol.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll shoot you a book. It just came
Yeah,
out
sweet.
from Amazon. So I'll tell you how it came up. So 2021 season, I was doing a lot of hard enduro riding on a motorcycle, and after every boat of that for like few days, I feel broken, like everything hurts. So I go to the gym and I'm like, what the fuck should I do? And then I come up with the idea of just making sure to use lower loads and just making sure that I kind of work on again structure, substance on the tendons and things like that. So I would say invented. There's nothing new under the sun. So I kind of formulated. I call it the ISO sandwich. So you start with a ISO hold, do a few quality reps, and then ISO hold. So let's say a split squat. You take a load, you go down, hold for like 5 seconds, and then do 5 reps, and then finish with 5 seconds. So this way you have this built-in limitation, so you don't go with a hard with a
Mm.
heavy load, right? And the ISO sandwich was the original name, but funny enough, when you ride enduro in Serbia here, we call each other Jazavac in Serbian, which is Badger. We call each other Badgers, right? So I was like, fuck, I'll call it the Badger protocol. So the name stuck, right? And then it gained traction online. And I was like, fuck hell. It's just wrapping simple things in a nice box.
Yeah,
It's nothing, major. So just this isometric hold is just making sure that you don't do too much too soon, if that makes sense.
gotcha.
Just focusing on the quality reps rather than chasing the numbers. And I think it's similar to the concept. So of imagine you do a sparring with someone who's much weaker than you, or like skill wise worse than you, say boxing, and then you can actually destroy this individual. But first of all, you're going to lose a training partner. He's not going to learn, you're not going to learn. So to kind of create equal playing field, you need to kind of I keep forgetting the name. You need to put limitations on yourself. So you might say, okay, I'll only do a counter punches, or I'll just punch with single punches, straight single punches, or I'll try to create angles. So this individual is learning, and you are also learning because you are putting some type of a limitation on yourself. So I think similarly, when you use submaximal loads in the gym, but because most of the time, also when we use percent base, we want to be more conservative. We're probably going to have some type of a wiggle room. So when I use loads that are below my kind of maximum, I need to put some type of a limitation on myself to actually make them useful. So what we can do, we can go for a higher reps, or we can slow the tempo down, or we can increase the velocity, or in this case, we can use pauses. Like you can use tempo squat or paused squat, or in this case, the Badger protocol. Just start with a pause, do quality reps, and then end with a pause. And then if you feel a lot of wiggle room, the last pause can be slightly longer. So handicapping, that's the word I've been like looking for. So you want to handicap yourself to use loads that are lower than your maximum, than your capacity, just to make sure that you are actually targeting capacities, if that makes sense. You're modifying the load. So similar to sparring with someone who's much weaker than you, you want to handicap yourself. The idea is similar with the again, in this case, Badger protocol, but can be something else.
So are you typically using something like this in a quote unquote like general preparation phase, or maybe a phase directly after a fight when loads might be typically low, or maybe someone coming out of injury? Is that when you're mainly using this, or is this also used maybe within a more quote unquote peaking style program closer to a fight?
I would say it can be used for like assistant exercises, can be used as a back off set, and it can be used like a full training phase when you are kind of restarting, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a method that can be applied, like, ISO holds or something like that. So it doesn't necessarily need to be like it's not a program. It's like a method you can play with.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, I need to play. I'm gonna play around with that probably tomorrow. Actually, do a couple of bits and pieces. Maybe try it with some push-ups. Maybe even try it with split squats, like you mentioned there too.
Yeah.
Are there any particular movements you've found that it works better for, or really well for, or ones that you typically maybe try and avoid?
Uh, all the pulling movements are a little bit tricky. Like pull-ups can be tricky to hold, but that you don't necessarily need to hold at the shortened position in the case of pull-ups.
Yeah.
With the pressing stuff, you usually do the holds at the longest
Yeah.
length, right? And according to research, holding these positions, are actually performing reps in a stretch position, can help with strength or hypertrophy. But again, I think it's a minutia, right? So all the evidence-based papers are actually, taking a very small stuff and then blowing it up out of proportion. So I think it's like, doesn't necessarily need to improve anything structure-wise, although I do think, for tendons and things like that to adapt, according to the research, you do need to have some type of a hold so the tendons can have a creep, and then that creep can actually stimulate the processes in the tendon. Again, there are different mechanisms or theories about it. But taking that outside, I think it's also like technique-wise. You can be working on a technique and a posture in the worst positions. So see it as a worst case scenario, like worst case training. It's like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, escaping from a back mount. So you put yourself in a shitty situation and then you work your way out. So I think the Badgers are similar. You put yourself in a worst case scenario and then work yourself out. And then, if you have problems with the posture, with the technique in a squat, your ass rounds or low back rounds in a bottom position, you can just pause at that position, focus on posture, squeezing. So even if it doesn't have any structural effects, it can have these technique effects, if that makes sense. So it can prepare you for upcoming training phases of blocks where you actually use higher loads.
Yeah. Nice. And to finish this off as well, you mentioned you're writing a book on endurance training for, I think it was for combat sports. You said it was broadly. Do you want to just go into? Well, I mean, we touched a little bit on the conditioning, but it'd be interesting to kind of go into maybe that and the whole philosophy around that conditioning for combat sports, and what I guess it's probably going to be in your book. So maybe just some ideas of kind of like that overarching philosophy.
So tricky one is that, as I said previously, I think we should save all these high intensity stuff. Depends on the phase, right? So I think we can split when it comes to combat sports, we can split let's call it a season into 3 different thematic blocks. So one is after a fight, let's call it a pivot block or recovery block. Then you might have off the camp, I don't know how to call it, like a just normal block. Then you might have a camp block and a fight, right? So you have 3, like a pivot, developmental, and say peaking, whatever, or camp. And the way you're gonna selected loads and conditioning methods will kind of tend to differ, right? So I would say with the pivot, the best thing is to move away from your normal activity. Just practice another sport or something like that. Just go for a cycling, go for a swim, travel with your family to another country. Take a break or something like that for like a week or two or something like that. And with the developmental, you want to focus on a skill work, and you want to make sure that the skill work is done at the highest level of quality. So all the conditioning should kind of support that. So conditioning will be more, I would say, extensive, but maybe it can be high intensity stuff also. But you're mainly gonna do it on a non-specific with a non-specific means. So it can be air dying, can be running, can be sled pushing, can be rope, something like that. Then when you go in a camp, I think then your conditioning should start to become more specific. But then it's not that easy, because with the training camp, you might have so many stuff happening in a specific manner. So you still want to make sure that you continue doing some general stuff. So I would say high intensity conditioning should be specific, but in the training camp, you still want a thread of something easier, like go for a swim or go for a walk, go for a cycle, just, maintain the base. Otherwise, you're just going to create so much specific stress for a specific tissues that, might break, right? If you do everything specific, you create specific loadings. So you want to kind of distribute that stress, hopefully to avoid kind of overloading a specific stuff. So if you do everything like you do a heavy punch intervals, you heavy spar, and your shoulder or your elbow or your wrist might break. So it's always juggling all of these. So again, unfortunately,
No, do you think there's potentially a trade-off with going, say, specific high intensity work? Is there a trade-off with intensity? So obviously like off-field equipment, you like whatever, you can just go balls out and you can get max intensity. But say you're doing, I don't know, different live sparring scenarios or something like that. Obviously, there is potentially some trade-off because you're going against a live opponent. Do you think there's some kind of interaction there, or is that something that needs to be solved, or that maybe that doesn't matter?
I think there's also a language thing, like phenomena. When we talk conditioning, I don't think conditioning is only physical. So conditioning is
For
also
sure.
stress inoculation. I don't know how to call it. Being able to handle a competition stress. So I think that's like some type of form of conditioning. So I think first of all we have this language barrier. So we tend to explain or simplify or reduce the complex phenomena of fighting to physiology, and I think it's useful as a substance, right? But it's just only one part of the equation. So I think hard sparrings develop something else, not only conditioning, like in a simplistic way, like VO2 max or aerobic conditioning and so forth. And also there are different stuff that needs to be developed. Like you want to condition your wrists, your nose, your neck, right? So it's slightly beyond the physiology and VO2 max and lateral threshold. So that's why I think the hard sparrings are useful for. But again, if you go back to the substance versus form, sometimes we want to isolate some type of a component and hit it with maybe non-specific stuff. So it's like a seesaw. You always have like two sides of a coin. You have a positive side and a negative side. So speaking of, say, punch-out drills, punch-out drills will be really good if you have your sparrings are light. So you do like a touch sparring or a flow sparring. It's very good for skill development and everything. But you don't condition yourself for hard hitting. So your conditioning needs to be maybe punch out drills on a heavy bag, or like some type of specific conditioning with the pad work, because you want to condition your joints and everything for hard hitting. And then in that case, that's a good one. But if you do a lot of hard sparring and then you do extra punch out drills, then you might create like a too much load for these joints, right? So it becomes problematic. So that's why I said maybe in those scenarios when you have hard, like when you have a hard specific conditioning, you're going to do easier non-specific conditioning. If your specific work is easy, you're going to do hard non-specific work. You're just going to kind of balance the seesaw, if that makes sense. So I think that's
Yeah.
one of the main mental models or principles behind the decision making. If everything you do is like a easy flowish sparring, which I think it's very needed for skill development, then your conditioning, you want to hit the stuff that you don't hit with the condition, with the specific work, if that makes sense.
Yep. No, that makes sense. That was perfect. That answered the philosophy question for.
And I think this will fluctuate throughout the season, right? The if you put specific work as a core, that's going to tend to fluctuate. So and as a result, your selection of non-specific and also extra specific conditioning will also fluctuate to kind of follow that along.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. No, that's perfect, Mladen. That was everything I had asked, or at least questions written down for you on that. But where can people find you, follow you, keep up with what you're doing and everything with complementary training?
So yeah, I'm on Instagram pretty often. So physical prep on Instagram, Twitter, X. I tend it's slowly going. I would say use of Twitter is going a little bit down.
Yeah, the reach sucks on there, man.
Yeah. So I open on a Twitter. I open to check the comments and I get like ads. I'm like unrelated. What's happening? Unless you pay or something like that.
Yep.
So I'm on Instagram. I started a school community. It's Agile Periodization School community, trying to share more like a work in progress notes and some type of a working projects and stuff, so people can actually jump in and help me and help us kind of develop it more, fine tune it. So, and also complementarytraining.com, which is my main website where we post kind of finish stuff and blog posts and what have you.
Perfect. I'll link this up in the description for everyone to check out. But I appreciate you coming on, Mladen.
Thanks for having me, James.